When we're planning to build a new home, we're thinking about the views. We love this view. We're thinking about the finishes. We're thinking about the layout. But if we're wise, we're going to give a lot of careful consideration to the mechanical systems because the comfort and the experience of living in a building is directly connected to those mechanical systems. In this video, my goal is to share with you about 3 areas that we had to think through in our process, what we learned, and hopefully there'll be some takeaways for you if you're planning to do a build and things to just consider about how all of this comes together when you're building a new home. When we started this process of looking to build a home, I thought the only way we would be able to afford it was to do it as an owner builder. So I spent about 2 years watching as many videos and reading as many articles as I could about construction and trying to understand how do you build a really quality home, and how do you save costs in different areas. We ended up, after that process, meeting a builder and working with a builder for a variety of reasons. But I gained a lot of knowledge about all of these systems, both from those learning things and from actually doing it. And I can still remember the first time that I came up here, I met with Paul, who was our builder, and I'm showing him the view and the layout. And Paul is looking around at where's the power coming in and thinking about all of these different areas that you have to have that can add all kinds of extra cost onto the project. And so a good, wise builder is going to bring that kind of consideration into the process. So let's go to the first area that I want to share with you, and that's all about water. Now, when you're thinking about water, you actually have to begin with the end in mind. I'm standing on top of our septic tank right here. And if you're building and you're able to connect to a sewer system, you're probably going to have a very fixed cost for what that will take for you to connect to that system. But if you have to put a septic system in, there's quite a bit of work that needs to happen ahead of time. In our area where we live, that required us to have a perk test to see how well our soil drains. And based on that, then an engineer has to create a septic plan for the size of the house, how much distance you need, what type of system that you need. And all of those things have to be submitted before you can even get approval to start the building process. So those things, the cost can vary for that. We were fortunate on our end in that our soil is very sandy and very gravelly. So gravelly, I don't know if that's a word, but there's a lot of gravel. And the water is going to drain very fast here. So because of the size of our house, we have a 1,500-gallon tank, which is a larger tank, but our engineered plans only called for something like a little over 100 feet of leach field. Now, we ended up adding 240 feet in our leach field because it's pretty inexpensive and you're better to oversize those systems than undersize those systems. So you got to know where all the water is going to go. In addition to knowing where the water is going to go, we got to know where the water is going to come from. And in our situation, we have a well, it's 113 feet deep. If you have municipal water, you're going to know the cost of that, be able to figure that out pretty reasonably. But in our situation, we had contacted a well driller. They were not available for quite a long time. They had some health issues. We ended up contacting another well driller. We were able to get the build started without having the well drill. It's better to have that done ahead of time. In our case, our bank gave us provision for that to be able to do it later, but there's a lot of risk in that. And you can gain some information by talking to your neighbors. A lot of times, if a well driller too has done a lot, they can give you some insight into it, but you really don't know until you actually get in the ground how far you're going to have to go when you have a well. If you want to hear the whole story about this, it's an awesome story. I've got another video about it, but I don't want to go into all of that right now. It's really hard to overstate how valuable an abundant and clean water source is. Our neighbor who lives just down the way from us, they can't even do multiple loads of laundry in a day because they have a limited well. Our other neighbor over behind us here, the well for their house, there was so much iron in it that they said they never used that for anything in the house. They had in their barn a hand dug well, which they would go out and get water from that and bring it in. So when you're thinking about the comfort of your life, water is hugely important. And if you're looking to build something where you have to drill a well, how that turns out is going to be a big factor in the comfort of living in your home. Well, it turns out that our neighbor wasn't the only one who had the iron and a little bit of sulfur in their water. We did as well. And so behind me, there's some basic things that are in here. You're going to see the expansion tank. Don't be hard on our electricians. This stuff right here was all work that I did after we moved in when we finished this lower level. You can see a full tour of that. It's a unit for my in-laws. So we have a sediment filter here, and then we have this 3-stage heavy metal filter for it. I did a lot of research on this. This is around $500. It was. I found it on Amazon, and the reviews were very positive for it in removing iron and removing sulfur from the water. It's worked great for us for iron. We have a lot of usage in the house. Again, it's a multi-family house. They say that they're rated for a year. Some people get longer than that with the filters. I find that at about 6 months, it's time for us to change them. We could do that out longer, but we start to see some of that rust coloration show up in the toilets. And my concern is also for, our dishwashers and washing machines and hot water heaters, and not wanting them to have to deal with that iron related to it. So this was kind of something that we added on because the well didn't happen until we were in the build. Didn't know what the quality of the water was going to be. But then once we had that, we added the filter on. And with the filter, the water is awesome. I love it. I never drink municipal water again. Where I work, I always bring like multiple water bottles because our water is so good and so abundant. So we're super thankful for it. The other thing that you might want to consider, just a little bonus tip, is if you have your hose spigots, what we did here is we ran a separate line off of this so that our hose spigots don't go through the whole house filtration system. And that's just going to save your filters. You don't need that for the hose. It doesn't need all of this heavy metal stuff taken out of it there. I just want to add about these filters. I'm going to put a link in the description for them, but I have another friend of mine who purchased those kind of based on my recommendation. They had a real high sulfur content, and it did help, but with their hot water, it hasn't taken the sulfur all the way out of it. They still have that smell, so they've had to do some additional filtration, modification, things with that. So I don't know how effective it is with sulfur, but from an iron standpoint, it's really good. The final factor that you have to consider with your water is how are you going to heat it? And I spent an unusual amount of time thinking about this question, in part because I had come across a presentation. I can't remember if it was on Fine Home Building or a building science program that was talking about how every faucet should have hot water within 2 cups. Now, thankfully, we have a real abundant water source, so conservation on that end is not hugely necessary. But the questions that I think you want to consider are, how much hot water do I want and how quickly do I want it to get there? So thinking about the positioning of your system, and kind of largely the market today is going into 2 areas. One, you have an on-demand system, and then 2, you have these heat pump water tanks, which are a lot more efficient related to that. For us, because we're heating a multifamily house, having a high volume was important. This was kind of an upgrade from what our builder had initially put in his budget, but it is rated to do 5.7 gallons per minute to raise those like 67 degrees. So, if you think of your water as coming in around 50 degrees from the ground and wanting to bring it up to 120, that can run a lot of stuff. It's really effective. And then the other question that you want to consider is, how quickly is that water going to get here? So one of the nice things about this is it had a recirculation pump that's built into it. So actually in our first floor ceiling, we have a recirc pump that keeps that hot water at close to temperature. We've insulated that. And so we have our 2 bathrooms on our second floor level where our bedrooms are. And that water, when I take a shower in the morning, I get in and I pretty much have instant hot water related to that. So thinking about, how much hot water do you want to have available, and how quickly do you want to have it available? You can get super kind of nerded out on that, but that'll give you some ideas about what you want to think about related to your hot water. Now, the next major system that is dramatically going to impact how comfortable it is to be in your house is your heating and cooling system. And there are a few pain points for us as we were thinking about this and kind of planning and trying to lay it out. Number one is I want to sleep comfortably and I don't want to be hot when I'm sleeping. The second thing is we wanted to be able to be warm in the wintertime. I grew up with a wood stove with wood heat in our house, and that was really enjoyable from a warmth standpoint. Then we lived, before we built this house, we lived in a much older house with a two-stage natural gas furnace that was very drafty, and you're constantly playing that game of like, how many layers do you wear and trying to save cost and just the draftiness of that house. So wanting it to be warm in the winter, wanting it to be refreshing in the summertime when it's humid out. If you work in a place where you're out in the humidity, you find that that's really draining. Sometimes on those days, you'll go into a store and the air conditioning will be on, and it's like all of a sudden you get this jolt of energy. Well, for our home, we want that to be a place where it's energizing for us. So the systems that you use to heat and cool are going to have a big impact on that. And the cost of operating them psychologically is going to have a big impact on you. So thinking about what kind of systems can you have that are going to be efficient in their use, so that you might even give yourself that internal permission to actually set the temperature at what you want it to feel comfortable without having to pay an exorbitant amount of money for that. So one of the main choices you're going to make is, do you want to have ducts that are bringing that to you inside the walls, or do you want to have a ductless system? Those are often more affordable, but you have those air handler units that are up on the wall that take up space, and different people have different opinions about how they look. They're a great option for older homes when you're retrofitting and you can't add the ductwork in. But in our case, we wanted to put a ducted system in. And something to be aware of if you are putting a ducted system in and you have a multi-story home, that I learned from our HVAC technician, was it's nearly impossible to properly cool the second floor when it's hot if all of that is one system. So if you are in the situation where you have a house and you have air conditioning, what happens is people have to super cool the first floor in order to cool the second floor. I was talking to a guy that I work with and just sharing that exact same experience with me of, kind of the weird temperature variations that they have to have throughout their house. So if you're designing this and you have a multi-story home, you're really going to want to have a separate system for a second floor than a first floor, separate ductwork, or maybe you go with the mini split route where you avoid the ductwork for that. The route we ended up going were with these two heat pumps. This Train is um, and a Mitsubishi. The Train heats and cools the ground floor and the first floor, and the Mitsubishi heats and cools the second floor for this. The Train is rated to -5, and the Mitsubishi is rated to -13 degrees. They're variable speed. They're pretty quiet. This one here is mounted directly into the concrete with the brackets, and then this one is a little bit louder here on the ground sometimes, but overall, really quiet operation. And I'll show you the air handlers inside that these are connected to. -5 is actually not sufficient for the temperatures that we get. So our air exchange unit here for the Train system, which heats and cools 2 levels, also has a small propane powered furnace that kicks in when the temperature drops really low. That's very comforting where we live, where it wouldn't be uncommon to several times a year have temperatures, -10 or lower. This will kick on automatically before it gets to -5 as the efficiency drops. There's kind of some sophisticated programming in there that determines when to kick this on based on how hard the unit is working for it there. I do use HEPA 13 filters in this. And so I change them about monthly or every other month because that can put a drag in, but I like how that helps kind of clean the air. More on the ventilation later. And this gives you the second floor train unit. Inside of this actually has strip heat backup. This is the one that's rated to -13. We leave the breaker off for this. We don't even have that turned on. But this is an excellent unit. Really have enjoyed this Mitsubishi Hyperheat. Although there was some weird thing that happened with us with the remote thermostat for it. We had to send that back and get a replacement. There's a known issue. So if you have one of those and it gets stuck in wait mode, that's a known issue. Here's the reality. You want to be comfortable in the house that you live in. And so having this system, your heating and cooling thought through, is a huge, huge factor in you enjoying the comfort level of your home. The final critical system that you're going to have, especially in a modern built house, is you need a ventilation system. And building codes will allow for some provision now to run bath fans. And bath fans are a part of your ventilation system, but you really need a dedicated ventilation system, especially if you have a tight house like ours. We got a one blower door on it. So I'm outside because you can see the intake, and on the other side, that's the exhaust ports for our ventilation system. It's simple but effective. There's Cadillac versions. You can go ridiculous buku money on these things, but this one really does a good job. And let me show you, talk to you about it, and explain its importance. Now, right above me here, you're going to see our Life Breath HRV. And I spent a lot of time trying to make sense of what was going to be the best system for our house in connection with our builder and with our HVAC guy, who both of them are phenomenal. Really respect their opinions. If you're familiar with home performance, they're going to talk about how important fresh air is inside of your home and the need to ventilate that air. The way that this Life Breath system works is it brings in that air, it exchanges the temperature of it, and then it dumps it into our ground floor and first floor ducted system. So it pulls some out, it puts some in there. Um, I watched Home Performance. If you're looking into all this stuff, you're probably familiar with Home Performance on YouTube. He was on Matt Reisinger's program at times. And you'll hear people talk a lot about ERVs. Well, the reason that we went with an HRV in our climate is our primary concern was actually the humidity levels in the winter time. Not the humidity in the summer, because in the summer you're running air conditioning, you're naturally dehumidifying. In the winter time, when you have a real tight house like we do, we have spray foam, the outside was done taped with zip tape, and like I said, we got a one blower door score. So our concern was in the winter time having too much humidity happen at that point. So what the HRV does is it brings in that air without exchanging the humidity. In the wintertime, the exterior air is drier, so it helps to regulate the humidity in the wintertime. And in the summertime, we're able to keep our humidity levels below 50% or right around 50%. So that is working out ideally for us in that way. But I agonized a long time about that. We didn't have a lot of money to spend on it. It was an added cost. We went back and forth on it, but really glad that we went with a ventilation system. And honestly, if you're building today, you should just determine, like, I have to have a ventilation system in your house. It's really not even an option anymore if you're going to have a healthy home with how tight you have to build the home. Ventilation really isn't complete without having a hood over your stove. You want to take those off. I thought I had a big enough fan on this one. I wish I had a bigger one. We cook a lot of steaks on here, a lot of things with grease. I wish I had a stronger one at some point. We'll upgrade this, but that's a part of just your home indoor air environment, keeping that clean. Wow, we covered a lot in this, and there's a lot more to cover, but I really wanted to try and help you just have some ideas and understanding. And I know what it was like to really search and search and search and to get all of that understanding. And I found these videos so helpful for me to be able to hear from other people, to learn from their experience. And I hope that that is what you've gotten out of this. If you're still watching, thanks so much. Hit the like button. My name's Woodley. We'll see you next time.